Thank you for joining us here on this Monday. This is India Tonight and I'm Nivedna Prabhu. Now, the Israel-Iran war rages as the conflict enters its second week. In fact, a lot has changed after the US attacked the nuclear facilities of Iran on Saturday using the bunker busters. Hostilities continues as Israel attacked Iran's Fordo nuclear facility today. Let's also tell you, the IDF also targeted the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps headquarters. Rafael Mariano Grossi, the head of the United Nations nuclear watchdog, said that very significant damage is expected at Iran's underground facility at Fordo after the US attack. While we continue to put that into perspective, you're looking at some of the visuals on your screens as well, the aftermath of that particular moment being caught on camera. Meanwhile, let's tell you, the Middle East nations fear the prospect of a wider war, especially after US bombing Iran's nuclear facilities and program. Iran's foreign minister met Russian President Vladimir Putin and condemned the US attack on Iran's nuclear program. Now, the fresh attacks raise the question, will the US attack on nuclear facilities mark the end of this conflict or only a fresh chapter in the dangerous war? We discussed that tonight, but before that, Priyank Tripathi joins us live from Tel Aviv. Priyank, very good evening. Given the fact that you're on the ground, you're looking at what is unfolding. While we continue to look at this particular situation, what's the latest that we're picking up?
See, today was a good evening. Today was the day two when the US Air Force had hit out on the nuclear establishment there in Iran. And there was a second set of retaliatory missile attack which happened towards Israel from the Iranian side. The first attack happened around 3 a.m., which was averted by the Israeli Defense Forces. But later in the day, around 10:30, there was another set of missile attack which came towards Tel Aviv. Barely 45 kilometers away from Tel Aviv, there's a area called Ashdod, where there was a power station. It was hit badly, and what we also got to know that in Haifa also there have been missile attack report which came early in the day. Just a short while back, I was reporting from Ashdod, where we could see that the repair work is going on. Basically, the Israelis have adjusted to this kind of lifestyle that they will be attacked, they have to save themselves, and once again they have to go back to the normal lifestyle. But the biggest worry for them is that Khamenei, who is certainly very much rattled after the nuclear plant there in Iran has been hit out badly, it could affect the business for the rest of the world, plus him being rattled and at the age of 83, where he can realize that he has to do something which should be remembered for the generations to come. He can take any step. So that is certainly which is making this case very much tricky. Israelis know that the US is along with them, but looking at the ground situation where missile attack has been happening, they never know that what kind of retaliation can once again come up from Iranian side. Iran has made their point very much clear that it was a blatant attack on them. They were not going to make any nuclear missile or nuclear bomb. They were trying to enrich the uranium for the purpose of benefit of their own people, which was not taken by the US also or by the Israelis. That's why this attack has happened. We know this war has been going on since several decades. What is going to be there in the future, we'll have to wait and watch for that.
Absolutely. How that's going to unfold, time is going to be telling us. So, Priyank, thank you very much for joining us with the latest that we're given to understand from Ground Zero. Having said that, please continue to stay safe. Having said that, let me take that opportunity to also introduce our guests on today's show. Dan Smith, Director, Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, as well as Ori Goldberg, political commentator. Good evening to the both of you, gentlemen. Thank you very much for taking the time out and joining us here on ET. Now, Mr. Smith, let me begin by asking you this. On one hand, countries like China are adding 100 nuclear warheads each year. And here we have the United States attacking Iran on behalf of Israel. Do you think such moves will further strengthen the resolve of other countries to develop nuclear weapons and dirty bombs?
Well, I think that the first conclusion that anybody is drawing from this is in North Korea, where there is absolutely no possibility now that North Korea would ever agree to denuclearization. So I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing is that we need to think about what will happen in Iran. There is no proof that Iran was planning to develop, or let alone was developing, nuclear weapons. And as recently as March, that was the view of US intelligence. Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, said that they did not assess that Iran was building a nuclear weapon. But perhaps now there is a motivation to do so, and to do so in secret, and to do, as they do so, then to blow apart the non-proliferation in the Middle East region. I think if Iran goes nuclear, then there could be another state or two in the region that also goes nuclear. And then I think we are into a very, very dangerous situation. So what has happened with the US bombing Iran is certainly not the end of anything. Precisely what it's the beginning of is, or the next chapter in, is rather hard to say at the moment where this story goes, but it's not over yet.
All right, Mr. Smith, as you call it, a dangerous situation, and rightly put across that we don't know how that's going to unfold. But Dr. Goldberg, let me take that across to you. How do you look at this? Do you expect Iranian regime to surrender irrespective of public statements of defiance? And if not, then what are the options before it, in your opinion?
I don't expect the Iranian regime, the Islamic Republic, to surrender irrespectively. I agree with Mr. Smith very much. This is the beginning, not the end. The options Iran has, I think, are well known. Iran can retaliate against the United States. And if it does so, it will drag the United States into a cycle of violence that cannot end well for Iran, but will likely also end poorly for American forces in the Gulf and in the Middle East. Iran can also work on a diplomatic track, trying to find an off-ramp at the very least that would provide itself and the United States an opportunity to save face. What seems certain is that if it does work on the diplomatic track, and it appears that it is doing so, Iran would very much like to keep the United States out of the next stages of this war, should this war continue. That means drive a wedge between the United States and Israel. That doesn't sound far-fetched to me, I have to say. Even Trump's attacks on Fordo and the other installations did not resemble in any way pronouncements like former President Joe Biden's don't speech. The US at the moment is much less obligated to Israel than it was. It still is, very much so. It's not on Iran's side, but it's much less obligated. I think Trump divides the world into winners and losers, and Trump is looking to see what Israel is doing and what sort of results it can achieve. I can say that from the Israeli side, it looks like despite Israel's military prowess on the tactical level, it seems to be faltering on the strategic level. It's not clear what Israel wants anymore. It's not clear whether Israel is after Iran's nuclear program, whether Israel is after regime change. In any case, the Israeli efforts end up in death and destruction, but nothing much manages to stick when it comes to broader strategic goals. I'm sure President Trump is not blind to that state of affairs.
All right, Dr. Goldberg, as you say that, and your viewpoint, of course, being that Iran will try keeping US out of this situation, the escalating situation that we're looking at, which takes me to my next question, Mr. Smith, to you. Will I be wrong to say this conflict is turning out to be an advertisement for America's firepower and weapon systems, be it the B-2 bombers or the mother of all bombs?
I think with both Israel and the USA, what we are seeing is a demonstration of, military impact, military effectiveness. But I think, and this is the point that Dr. Goldberg was just making, I think, is that there's a sharp distinction to be made between a military operation that is a success in its own terms, that meets the objectives of that operation. If the damage is as extensive as it might be, if it's even half as extensive as President Trump was saying it was immediately afterwards, then you could call this a successful operation. But do you see the big picture as a success? If it is increasing risk of nuclear proliferation, if there is increasing vulnerability for US forces in the Gulf, if the action has turned an important country with a population of over 90 million, turned it from being an adversary into being an enemy, And if you open the time frame so that you don't think just about what Iran might do in the next week or the next month or the rest of this year, if you think about what it may do through the rest of this decade in the coming years, I don't think that we can say that this is a success. And I don't think we can say, therefore, that it's really an advertisement for the effectiveness, except in very narrow operational terms, of the use of force. And in fact, I think that is one of the things to pursue out of this, is that diplomacy was not allowed to do what it could do. Diplomacy produced the Iran nuclear deal, which offered a block on Iran's nuclear development program for 10 to 15 years. This military operation may have offered a block for 2 to 3 years before either it needs to be done again or Iran actually does have a nuclear weapon. So I think we can see diplomacy would have been the more effective path to take. It would have been the less spectacular one, the less performative one, but it would have been the more effective one.
All right, and as you pointed out, Dr. Goldberg, US in fact has officially stated that regime change is not the goal, but Trump muses publicly that regime change is on the table if Khomeini can't make Iran great again. Do you see a larger strategy here?
No, I don't. I see President Trump being President Trump. And because I very much agree with the point Mr. Smith just made in his previous answer, I'd like to, for a second, just move us from Iran to Israel's war in Gaza. I think Israel's war in Gaza, coming after rounds of hostilities and Israeli attacks in Gaza from 2008 to 2025, proves Mr. Smith's point exactly, and also proves why there's no use in seeing strategy in President Trump's pronouncements. Israel began attacking Gaza under Hamas in 2008, and every round of hostilities, which took place in 2012, 2014, and sporadically since then, every round was much more intense and required much, much more violence and military power than the round that preceded it. And of course, it ended with the current round, which is a war or a genocidal campaign, call it what you like, that has lasted over 2 years and has brought Israel precisely no result whatsoever, despite its use of the most effective military power in the world. Now, President Trump expressed when he entered office, expressed his sentiments about Gaza, uploaded a clip to his Truth Social network that included a golden statue of himself on a Gazan Riviera. None of what he said actually came to pass. So I think that Trump is intentionally being Trump. He's not keeping all options open. He's not directing any kind of strategy. I think, again, Trump divides the world into winners and losers. He wants to see whether what Israel is doing in Iran will have an impact beyond the pyrotechnics of destruction. If it does, he may choose to leverage it to his own benefit. If he doesn't, he has numerous reasons to stay out of this conflict, perhaps the most important one being stringent domestic criticism to which he's being exposed from the right wing of his base, the MAGA movement.
All right, and as you put that into perspective, Dr. Goldberg, Mr. Smith, coming back to you, how do you see the conflict panning out? Do you see a role for Russia here? Why do you think the MAGA president forgot lessons from Iraq and Syria, in your opinion?
I think he's forgotten lessons from Iraq and indeed Libya and other places because he just doesn't think in that kind of way. I don't think he takes a long-term view like that, and I don't think that there's the rational calculation going into this. I think he's consistent in some of the things that he believes in, and he's intuitive about how to act on them at any one time. And that can sometimes take him into quite spectacular actions, more of which are successful than some of his opponents would like to believe. But many of which are really not fully thought through, and there's no real end goal in mind. I think that the way that it may pan out now is that we will see a kind of a fragmentation. I think that we may see a fragmentation of action, we may see a fragmentation of parties and of players, we may see increasing risks and dangers of different kinds. The USA is at war with Iran, and Iran, that's first of all, that's a factual situation. Secondly, that's what Iran has said. Allies of the USA therefore find themselves in a potentially difficult situation if they also have areas of vulnerability. So I think that this is going to be an extremely risky period coming, with possibly a fair amount of what one could call relatively low-level violence, but on a large scale, and therefore adding up to a serious problem over time.
All right. And Dr. Goldberg, given the fact that how Mr. Smith put that into perspective, the other aspect is how Netanyahu says first comes strength, then comes peace. Do you think he has any political ability to bring out peace? What will stop Israel now from ending the war, in your opinion? Is it, its own citizens?
Well, first, I think I should point out that even that remark was taken directly from President Trump's words in an obsequious attempt to get the United States to enter the fray. Can Prime Minister Netanyahu bring peace? It doesn't seem to me as though Israel under Netanyahu is particularly interested in peace. In fact, the new Israeli security doctrine, if you will, is that Israeli security amounts to the Israeli ability to shoot anyone wherever they want, whenever they want, for as long a duration as they want, and to pay very little price, if any at all, as the consequence of that violence. I think one of the reasons Netanyahu chose to start this war in Iran at this time was the sense that the Americans and the Iranians were perhaps getting somewhere as far as a nuclear deal of sorts might be possible. And I don't think Netanyahu is particularly interested in peace. The real problem is not that Netanyahu is interested in a war. If he was interested in a war with clearly defined goals like regime change or the occupation of Iran, we might be able to try and analyze his potential actions in the short term, the midterm, or the long term. We could consider various scenarios for how this might evolve. But Netanyahu's not interested in a war either. And again, I point to Gaza. Netanyahu doesn't seem to be interested in occupying Gaza and achieving what many believe to be Israel's stated goal, which is Jewish settlement. Netanyahu seems to be interested in a kind of a forever war, which is convenient for him personally and politically in domestic terms, but which I think he also fervently believes is in Israel's best security interest. That, in many ways, is the greatest threat to both regional order and the global order, as far as Israel is concerned at the moment.
All right. Given the fact that we're looking at it from that prism, Dr. Goldberg, Mr. Smith, before we wrap up the show, your closing comment on given the fact that there is a growing overlap between the Red Sea as well as the Hormuz flashpoints as well, do you think it's becoming a theater for strategic signaling, especially by Iran? How do you look at that?
All right. Is it a theater for strategic? I couldn't quite hear. Can you repeat?
Is it a strategic messaging by Iran? How do you look at that?
I'm sorry, the volume is fluctuating towards me. What I think is going to happen is that Iran has got to be, in its own perspective, I think, the Iranian leadership has got to find a way of striking back at the big foe, the USA. The question is whether it will be wanting to do that in a way that is really destructive or, for the moment, somewhat symbolic to provide itself with an off-ramp. Either way, I think that there are worries and concerns to have across the rest of this year, through into the next year and the succeeding years. I think the region has become less secure, and I'm afraid that the world has as well.
All right, Mr. Smith, as you put that also into perspective, I want to thank you as well as Dr. Goldberg for joining us this evening and sharing with us your perspective. Like both of you did say, only time's going to tell how that is going to be unfolding. But for the moment, we leave it at that. All right, let's take a quick check as to how the Wall Street, in fact, is doing. In fact, the U.S. market in green, even as Washington struck Iranian nuclear sites, like we told you over the weekend, formally entering Israel's war with Iran. In fact, investors brushed off geopolitical risks, especially as oil prices slipped. U.S. crude dropped over 1% after Donald Trump urged restraint on prices. The Dow rose 189 points, while the S&P 500 and Nasdaq both gained 0.5%. This is as of now. In fact, quickly putting that into perspective, what we're looking at with Dow Jones is that the levels trading currently at 42,281. There is a slight change of 0.18%, and there's an uptick with the points is 74.53. But for the moment, that's a quick check of what we're looking at in terms of Wall Street. And on that note, that's all I have for you in this edition of India Tonight. Thank you very much for watching.